Well, don't come with an easy question or anything. I mean, I think the cause of the Civil War was basically how government was going to run, the freedoms and what people could and couldn't do. What do you think the cause of the Civil War was? I'm sorry?
I'm not running for president. I want to see your view on the cause of the Civil War.
I mean, I think it always comes down to the role of government. We need to have capitalism. We need to have economic freedom. We need to make sure that we do all things so that individuals have the liberties so that they can have freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to do or be anything they want to be without government getting in the way.
Thank you. And then in the year 2023, it's astonishing to me that you answer that question without mentioning the word slavery.
What do you want me to say about slavery? Next question.
This is my video update on this Thursday, December the 28th. Let's talk about some news. And we have got to start things off with two very interesting articles which came out yesterday. One from Politico and one from the New York Times. Now, these articles, I consider these articles as part 2 and part 3 of a 3-part trilogy. The first article came out courtesy of the New York Times a couple of days ago, which talked about how Russian President Vladimir Putin wants a ceasefire. The Politico article, which came out, is part 2 of the trilogy, and it talks about how Vladimir Putin wants a ceasefire, but the Biden White House, they are also open to negotiations, but are shifting Ukraine's strategy to a defensive posture. And part 3 of the trilogy, once again, is from the New York Times, and part 3 talks about an armistice to the conflict. So that's the 3-part trilogy to Project Ukraine from the Collective West mainstream media. Now, before I get into these articles, read you some excerpts from these 2 articles. Let me just say a couple of things about all of the articles that have come out over the past couple of days. The 3-part trilogy. Let me say a couple of things about the trilogy from the Collective West media on Project Ukraine. The first thing is that all of these articles, they always talk about Putin's failures. They have to talk about Putin's failures. So when you read these articles, keep in mind that they're always going to talk up Putin's failures, his military catastrophe, how Russia is isolated, how the Russian economy is in tatters. Tatters, I tell you. They have to add this in there. They have to put these talking points, these narratives. They have to weave these into the articles that they write about Project Ukraine. It's required. It's required that they talk about how Russia is in tatters and how Putin is failing. So that's the first thing that I want to say about these articles. So when you read the articles and it talks about how Putin's at his last day, it's the end for Putin, just keep in mind that this is just like filler text. That's it. Now, the first point that I want to make about the Collective West Project Ukraine trilogy of articles is that the main goal, the main purpose of the New York Times article, which talks about a ceasefire, of the Politico article, which talks about a change in strategy to a defensive posture, and the New York Times article, which lays out the conflict armistice or freeze. The main point of all of these articles is to protect the Biden White House. That is the main purpose of all of these articles. Protect the Biden White House from admitting to an embarrassing defeat, especially during an election cycle. Because what's the biggest fear? The orange man is the biggest fear, Trump. They're afraid of Trump winning the election in 2024, and they understand that an embarrassing, a catastrophic defeat at the hands of Putin and Russia is going to help Orange Man win the elections. So that's the main purpose of all of these articles. Protect the Biden White House. So that's the first point. The second purpose of the trilogy is to get Zelensky to negotiate with Russia, with the Putin, not Biden, not the United States. It has to be Zelensky. So the main purpose of these articles, the second main purpose of these articles, is to scare Zelensky into opening up negotiations, dialogue with the Putin. And it has to be Zelensky. That is the narrative. The Biden White House, for the last year and a half, 2 years, their narrative has been that they will not push Ukraine towards negotiations. It has to be the choice of Zelensky. And they've been running with that narrative for the past 2 years. It has to be Ukraine that decides. Ukraine is a sovereign, democratic nation. It has to decide. Zelensky has to decide. We're not going to push Zelensky to make any decisions he does not want to do. So the articles are meant to scare Zelensky into opening up dialogue with the Putin. If Zelensky thinks that there's some sort of back-channel diplomacy between the US and Russia, if he thinks that the Biden White House is changing strategy and changing their posture towards Ukraine, then Zelensky just might say, crap, they're making deals with the Russians without me. I better do something. Okay, maybe I'll call Putin. Fine, Blinken. Fine, Sullivan. I'll call Putin because the last thing I want to have happen is I don't want to be cut out of some sort of a decision or some sort of deal. So they want to push Zelensky to pick up the phone and call Putin. That's the second purpose, the second goal of these articles. The third purpose of these articles is to project the need for a ceasefire onto Putin and to Russia. So every time they say in these articles, and all three of these articles, they all say that Putin wants a ceasefire. Putin needs a ceasefire. Every time they say that, what they're really saying is that the Biden White House really, really needs a ceasefire. But they project that need for a ceasefire onto Russia and onto Putin. This makes it look like the Biden White House is winning. The Biden White House, if there is a ceasefire or an armistice or a freeze, the Biden White House can declare victory. Zelensky called up Putin. He opened up negotiations. Putin needed the ceasefire. We won. So the whole ceasefire talk that Putin wants a ceasefire, that's projection. Why would Russia want a ceasefire when it's winning on all levels, economic, diplomacy, the actual war, the actual conflict? Why would Putin want a ceasefire? Well, because the ghost of Kiev, the siege of Kiev, an impending coup. His economy may be good now. The Russian economy may be good now, but in the medium to long term, it's going to fall apart. Putin wants a ceasefire because of the elections in March 2024, and he's a dictator. and that's what dictators do. And the ICC warrant, he's a war criminal, and what else? Navalny or Yekaterina, what's her name? Duntsova or whatever. They make up a dozen excuses, a dozen reasons, which make no real sense as to why the Putin would want a ceasefire, but they weave that into the articles. So the final point that I want to make with this trilogy of articles is that there is, without a doubt, a belief in the collective West, in the Biden White House, that if they can get Zelensky to open up dialogue, negotiations with Russia, that they will be able to not only achieve a freeze or an armistice, but once they achieve that armistice or that freeze, they will be able to run the Minsk playbook all over again. Like, once again, they'll run the Minsk playbook, which is, as Angela Merkel put it, get a freeze, get a pause, buy time. They actually believe this. And I believe it's the part 3 of the trilogy, the New York Times article, the last New York Times article, which actually pretty much outright says this. It actually says, Zelensky, call Russia, and let's talk about an armistice. Let's give it a try. Let's give it a try. And the article says that as this armistice is forming, the accession of Ukraine into the European Union, building up Ukraine's military production, building up Ukraine's economy, all these things don't stop. And we're going to build a Ukraine that's more powerful than what's left of Ukraine, because they talk about how they're going to have to give up the 20% of the territory that Russia currently holds. But what's left of Ukraine is going to be more powerful than Putin could have ever imagined. A Korea model, a South Korea, North Korea model, Russia being North Korea, Ukraine being South Korea. So that's the final purpose of this trilogy of articles, in my opinion. And one final point. As all of this process is playing out, this strategy that the Biden White House, with the help of the collective West media, is putting together, the Putin wants a ceasefire, defensive posturing, and an armistice. As all of this is playing out, what I believe the Biden White House is thinking is that we'll build up fortifications in Ukraine. Will make it very difficult for Russia to go on the offensive. Will make it very costly for Russia to go on the offensive. Will husband whatever resources Ukraine has left in men, in weapons, in money. And if everything fails with this armistice plan, well, at least Jake Sullivan and Antony Blinken, at least they have bought Ukraine time. Actually, they've bought themselves time, and Ukraine will not collapse, at least until after the 2024 elections. So I think they're looking at that as the worst case scenario. So if this whole plan of ceasefire, armistice, and all of this stuff, if it doesn't work out, well, at least they'll make sure that Ukraine doesn't crumble on their watch. So that's my summary. That's my opinion of this trilogy of articles. So let's talk about part 2 of this trilogy. I already did a video on part 1 of this trilogy, which was the New York Times Putin wants a ceasefire article. Part 2 of this trilogy is courtesy of Politico, with the title, "The Biden Administration is Quietly Shifting Its Strategy in Ukraine." For 2 years, Biden and Zelensky have been focused on driving Russia from Ukraine. Now Washington is discussing a move to a more defensive posture. To a more defensive posture. That is the strategy shift from the Biden White House. Now, this article, it actually mentions that the Biden White House has signaled this shift when Zelensky was in town, and the narrative changed from as long as it takes to as long as we can. The article actually mentions that, and it says that when Biden made this statement, as long as we can, and I'm quoting from the article now, some analysts believe that is code for get ready to declare a partial victory and find a way to at least a truce or ceasefire with Moscow, one that would leave Ukraine partially divided. The article then goes on to say a shift to defense could buy Ukraine the time it needs to eventually force Putin into an acceptable compromise. That is taken directly from this Politico article. The article also goes on to say that the only way this war ends ultimately is through negotiation, and we want Ukraine to have the strongest hand possible when that comes. Now, of course, the Biden White House, according to Politico, is very nervous that a catastrophe in Ukraine could open up the doors for Trump, and it says, for Biden, navigating the nearly 2-year-old war in the middle of a tough election campaign with former President Donald Trump and other Republican candidates openly mocking his efforts will prove tricky at best. That is the Politico article. It goes on to say towards the end of the article that Biden faces political peril if the war goes badly for the Ukrainians. And finally, the article, the last paragraph, quotes Kirby by saying, in the end, said Kirby, it is Putin who must make the first move, and the Russian president hasn't done anything like that yet. While we all would like to see the war end immediately, Kirby said, Putin has shown no indication of entering into good faith negotiations. So that's the last part of this article. So that's part 2 of the trilogy. The Biden administration is quietly shifting its strategy in Ukraine. And I can imagine that when Zelensky read this article from Politico, he probably pooped in his pants big time. Yep. Big time, Zelensky pooped in his pants. They are making deals without me. How dare they? How dare they start making deals and changing strategy without me? Podolyak, this is unacceptable. Unacceptable. That's what this article's about. Freaking out Zelensky. Probably also freaks out the Europeans as well, because the EU is scared to death that the Biden White House is going to make deals with Russia without the EU included in those negotiations or in those deals. So this article probably scared a lot of people, not only in Kiev, but also in Brussels. And that brings us to the NYT article with the title, Ukraine doesn't need all its territory to defeat Putin. What? What? For 2 years, this entire conflict has centered around territory for the collective West, for the Zelensky regime. This conflict has focused on territory, not men, not soldiers, not the military, none of that stuff. It has been about how much territory can Ukraine get. The equation has been the equation for this conflict over the past 2 years, I'm talking about the military conflict in Ukraine, the equation has been more territory equals more money from the collective West. That's been the formula. And now all of a sudden, the New York Times is like, well, territory, it's not that important. It's not that important. But what the article is really talking about is an armistice. That's what the article is really talking about. Let me read you the first couple of paragraphs from this New York Times article, part 3 of the Project Ukraine ceasefire trilogy. The new report in the New York Times that Russia is quietly signaling a readiness to freeze the war in Ukraine is both suspicious and tantalizing. The caveats are many. An armistice would leave Vladimir Putin in control of about a fifth of Ukrainian territory. He is not trustworthy. He could use prolonged negotiations to bolster his forces for a renewed push. This is projection. Or 2, lull Western lawmakers into cutting aid for Ukraine. He may be stalling in the hope that Donald Trump, the orange man, his preferred choice for president, will return to the White House and stiff Ukraine. But if Mr. Putin turns out to be serious, Ukraine should not pass up an opportunity to end the bloodshed. Recovered territory is not the only measure of victory in this war. A painful reality check shows the 600-mile-long Ukrainian-Russian front in a figurative and literal freeze, draining Ukrainian resources and lives without much prospect for a change, is the foreseeable future. So the article then goes on to say that the conflict, there could be some miracles that happen in the conflict, the article says, but we shouldn't expect any miracles. Don't depend on the hope strategy. The most likely outcome is that this is going to be a long war of attrition, and the article says that this long war of attrition will inflict even more damage on Ukraine, sacrificing ever more lives and spreading instability over Europe. That, at least, is the bleak prognosis if victory in the war continues to be defined in territorial terms. And then the article goes on to say that if we change our concept of what victory means, and we don't define it, when I mean we, I mean the Biden White House, the collective West media, the Zelensky regime, if they don't define victory as territorial gains and they change their view of what victory means, well then, they could be okay with an armistice, a freeze, letting Russia keep the territory that they have gained, and then they can inflict the ultimate defeat on the Putin. And let me read you what the ultimate defeat on the Putin is. But regaining territory is the wrong way to imagine the best outcome. True victory for Ukraine is to rise from the hell of the war as a strong, independent, prosperous, and secure state, firmly planted in the West. It would be exactly what Mr. Putin most feared from a neighboring state with deep historical ties to Russia. And it would be a testament to what Russia promised to become in 1991 when both countries broke free of the Soviet Union. Before Mr. Putin entered the Kremlin and succumbed to grievance and the lure of dictatorial power and imperial illusion. Some pretty descriptive writing from the NYT, huh? Makes Putin out to be like Emperor Palpatine, or not even like Darth Vader or something. Before the dark side pulled Putin in. Wow. Let's see. But to explore an armistice is not to walk away. On the contrary, the fight must go on, even when talks begin, to maintain the military and economic pressure on Russia. So this is basically the article saying that what we're going to achieve with this armistice is going to be a Minsk III type of deal. We'll get the Russians to agree to a freeze, to an armistice, and as the Russians agree once again to this freeze, and they believe that we'll honor the agreement, we'll buy the time that we need in order to build up Ukraine, to finish the job that Minsk I and Minsk II didn't achieve because Putin launched the special military operation. And actually, this article even goes on to say that one of the sticking points with getting a freeze in the conflict, with getting an armistice, is the issue of NATO. Ukraine wants security guarantees, which they believe can come through NATO, and for Russia and for Putin, NATO is that red line. NATO is the reason why this conflict began in the first place. So the article is very sneaky, and it says that perhaps they can work around the NATO issue as they're hammering out the terms of this armistice by not agreeing to Ukraine getting full NATO membership. Let me read you what the New York Times says in this article. These are like the last paragraphs of this article. The first stage of talks they proposed would be focused on agreeing to stop hostilities, disengaging the forces, and installing a third-party monitoring mission. The next hurdle would be to devise a security arrangement that would give Ukraine the assurances it needs while taking account of Russia's opposition to a full NATO member on its western border. The key word here is full. That's the key word. Many other issues would enter into the mix. Russian war crimes, reparations, sanctions, and any armistice would be far short of a final settlement. But the only way to find out if Mr. Putin is serious about a ceasefire and whether one can be worked out is to give it a try. So they say Russian war crimes. Of course, they don't say Ukrainian war crimes in this paragraph. But anyway, a full NATO membership. That's the key. They think that they can probably work around. They can dupe the Russians into agreeing to an armistice if it doesn't include a full Ukraine NATO membership. And then the article says, let's give it a try. Let's see if we can fool Russia into agreeing to this ceasefire. So Zelensky, get on the phone, call Putin, or call China, or call India, or call Germany, or call France, whatever. Call someone to then call Putin and say, okay, let's talk. Let's negotiate. Let's freeze this conflict. Let's get an armistice. You're North Korea, Russia. We'll be South Korea. And the West is going to build Ukraine into this awesome, what do I want to say, beacon of economic prosperity and military prowess and the light of the European Union. I don't know, something like that. That's what they believe could take place. That's what they believe could take place. And they actually believe that Russia will fall for all of this. So the article says, let's give it a try. Let's give it a try. Why not? What do we have to lose? Let's give it a try. Worst case scenario is that at the very least, they'll be able to drag this out so that the collapse doesn't happen on their watch. That's the absolute worst case scenario. Anyway, those are the articles from the New York Times and Politico. We have the trilogy of Project Ukraine ceasefire coming to a theater near you. Will the Russians fall for this? Will they fall for this plan? The answer is no. Yet. Ohi. The Russians are not going to fall for it. And Medvedev, he figured this out right away, and he put out a post on Twitter, and this is what Medvedev said. Question by RIA Novosti. The collective West, having wasted almost all of its weapons, starts to push the Kiev regime to engage in talks in 2024. Is that possible? Answer. What about the talks in 2024? It's all perfectly clear. The special military operation will continue, with its aim still being the disarmament of the Ukrainian forces and abandonment of neo-Nazi ideology by the present-day state of Ukraine. Point two, displacement of the ruling Bandera regime is, though not openly stated, the most important and inevitable goal which must and will be achieved. Part three, Odessa, Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkiv, Nikolaev, Kiev, as well as many others, are Russian cities temporarily occupied. All of them are still marked by the colors of yellow and blue on the maps and pads. And so, yes, the talks are possible, of course. Russia never rejected them. Unlike the mad authorities of Ukraine, such talks have no time limits. They can go on till full defeat and surrender of the North Atlantic Alliance's Bandera forces. And by the way, I'd like to inform you that since January 1st, 2023, the armed forces of the Russian Federation have accepted 500,000 people as servicemen under contract. So I think what Medvedev says in this post on Twitter X is crystal clear. Crystal clear. He read the articles from Politico and the New York Times, and Medvedev is saying that Russia is not going to fall for any of this stuff. Point number two in his post was very, very interesting, where he talks about Odessa, Dnipropetrovsk, Kharkiv, Nikolaev, Kiev. He mentions Kiev. All of them are still marked by the colors of yellow and blue. Are Russian cities, Medvedev says. That's going to have the collective West very, very worried, that statement from Medvedev. Lavrov, he gave an interview, I believe, to RIA Novosti. And I think it was RIA Novosti. One sec. Let me see if I have it here. I don't have it here. I'm not sure if it was RIA Novosti. But anyway, he did give an interview to a major media outlet in Russia yesterday, I believe. And he also said that Russia's not going to fall for any of this armistice, ceasefire, freeze nonsense. Lavrov was very clear about that. He said that the Zelensky regime, they don't want peace. They're not willing to negotiate a peace based on the realities on the ground. He actually said that everyone has become sick and tired of the dollar, which is now a tool for regime change. And he also said, with regards to everything that has been happening in Serbia, he said that the West gave Serbia an ultimatum: either join the sanctions against Russia or face a coup. So those were the statements from Lavrov. Let's discuss Ukraine, and let's discuss Yulia Tymoshenko and what she said about the current situation in Kiev. So Yulia Tymoshenko, otherwise known as the Gas Princess, you may recognize her from she has like this, I guess you would say, this Princess Leia, or at one point in time she had this Princess Leia type of hairstyle, and that's what a lot of people kind of recognize her with that hairstyle. Anyway, she is, I think she's the leader of a political party in Kiev, an opposition party, if you want to call them that, which has something like 20% of the parliament, and she's an influential politician in Ukraine and has been for many, many decades. Very wealthy individual, the gas princess. And she actually, at one point in time, she actually had a good talking relationship with Putin once upon a time. Anyway, she told Zelensky that Ukraine needs a plan B. She said it needs a plan B because the current situation is tragic and will lead to defeat, which is code words for we've been defeated. So, crap, what do we do now? This is what Timoshenko said. Yes, today we are all for victory, for Ukraine, for territorial integrity, but head on, as this battle is going on today, it will be very difficult for Ukraine to fight long-term, protracted wars. Therefore, I ask the president, offer the country a plan B for our victory. There is no plan B. Plan B is what I just actually read from the New York Times and Politico. That's plan B or plan C or plan D, whatever you want to call it. That's the plan. That's the plan that the Biden White House has in mind for the Zelensky regime. Call up Putin and let's get an armistice. That's the plan. And the fail-safe, the fallback, if everything falls apart with plan B, with an armistice, is what I also said about the trilogy of articles. Build up defenses and just don't collapse during the 2024 election. That's the worst case scenario plan. So I guess I'm kind of answering Timoshenko's question, what is plan B? So I'm answering it for her because Zelensky, he doesn't have a plan B. That's for sure. So Timoshenko's concerned. She's concerned. Ukraine is about to suffer a very big defeat. And you know, Rabotinya, remember Rabotinya, the village that Ukraine captured something like 37 times during the big super duper counteroffensive? Well, it looks like the Russians have pretty much taken that village, or they're very close to taking all of that village now, which would effectively wipe out whatever itsy bitsy little gains Ukraine made during their super duper counteroffensive. And this is coming from the Institute of the Study of War, by the way. This is not even coming from pro-Russian channels. So even the Victoria Nuland Institute for the Study of War is saying that basically all of Ukraine's gains, however tiny they were, are being wiped away by the Russian military. So let's do a couple more stories and we will wrap this video up. The Financial Times, they interviewed Ukraine's economy minister, and she warned that delays to salaries and pensions, that there will be delays to salaries and pensions if Western aid stops. Ukraine may have to prioritize spending on defense above paying salaries if the EU and the US do not approve more aid soon, Deputy Prime Minister and Economy Minister Yulia Sviridenko said in an interview with the Financial Times on December 27th, which once again shows that there is no Ukraine economy. It's all being funded by the collective West, by the United States. Pensions, salaries, everything is being funded by the United States. So once the money stops from the United States, the economy collapses. So this article from the Financial Times may also be a way to place pressure on the Speaker of the House, Johnson, and Congress as they prepare to go back into session in about 2 weeks. But either way, it's proof that without the United States, Ukraine ceases to exist. And on that note, Blinken announced that the final payment from the Biden White House's drawdown facility for Ukraine has been given to the Zelensky administration. 250 million in military aid went to Ukraine. This is the final package of the year, according to Anthony Blinken. And even a German party leader, even a Green Party, playing music. I have to move now. I don't have a problem with people sitting down next to me, but when they're playing music, I have to move. So even a Green Party leader from Germany said that once the U.S. stops supporting Ukraine, it's over. He's like, let's not fool ourselves. Germany, the EU, we cannot support Ukraine. It's not going to happen. So that was said by Omid Noripur, a co-leader of Germany's Green Party. So let's do a clown world, I guess. I guess we could do a clown world. By the way, the meeting between Orbán and Zelensky, we have a Hungarian diplomat who said that this meeting still needs a whole bunch of preparation before it's given the green light. So that's an indication from Hungary that they're going to delay this Orbán-Zelensky meeting, which is smart. You don't want the Zelensky curse hitting Orbán. And we have news that the Turkish parliament or parliamentary panel has approved Sweden's NATO bid. So Sweden is one step closer to entering NATO. So let's do a clown world, wrap this video up, because this video is running a bit long. And I had two clown worlds lined up, but we'll just do one clown world. And this one comes courtesy of the Daily Beast with the title, Ex-Spy Chief Says Putin Will Be Ousted Soon Over Botched War. The hope strategy. Gotta love the hope strategy. The coup against Putin. Anyway, this article says the former head of the CIA has told The Sun that he believes that Vladimir Putin will be ousted in a Black Swan-style palace coup due to his handling of the war in Ukraine. Jack Devine, 83, reportedly said he wouldn't be surprised if the Russian leader, 71, disappeared tomorrow. There's always what we call a black swan that appears from nowhere. Putin could disappear tomorrow, and I wouldn't be surprised if some element in the government had decided they were going to take executive action. But failing a black swan, I believe his troubles begin when there's a stalemate, and that's right now. I don't think it'll be an uprising. I think it'll be what we might call a palace coup. The palace intrigue in the Kremlin. The hope strategy. If only Putin were removed from power. If only. Oh boy. I think there's quite a bit of projection here as well. And I wouldn't be so worried about, or I wouldn't be placing my bets on a palace coup in the Kremlin. I'm thinking that the big changes in government are going to probably happen in the collective West, but we'll see. We will see. Anyway, that's the video, everybody, or Ukraine, in the collective West or Ukraine. That's where we're going to see the big government changes. Anyway, that's the video, everybody. The Duran.locals.com. We are on Rumble, ODYSEE, BitChute, Telegram, Rockfin, and Twitter X. And go to the Duran shop. Use the code Christmas20, get 20% off.